There's a specific kind of courage that nobody talks about. Not the kind that charges towards something. Not the bold, visible, forward-moving kind that gets celebrated. The other kind. The quieter kind. The kind that requires you to open your hands and let something go that you've been gripping so tightly for so long that you stop noticing the grip. That kind of courage is harder, because holding on feels like caring. Holding on feels like loyalty. Holding on feels like refusing to give up on something that mattered. Like honoring what was real. Like being the kind of person who doesn't just walk away from things when they get hard. But at some point, and this is the part nobody wants to say out loud, holding on stops being any of those things. It stops being caring and starts being control. It stops being loyalty and starts being fear. It stops being about what was real and starts being about the inability to let what was real become the past. And that's where you are. You've been there for a while, and the holding on that used to feel like love is now just the thing that's keeping you from everything that comes after it. Let me be specific about what you're holding on to, because I think it matters to name it clearly, since holding on rarely presents itself honestly. It disguises itself as virtues, as hope, as depth of feeling, as the refusal to be someone who gives up easily. You're holding on to the person, not who they actually are right now, who they were, the version that existed at the best point of what you had. The version that showed up fully, that made you feel chosen, that was everything the relationship was supposed to be at its peak. That version is the one you're clinging to, not the current reality, the memory of the highest point held up against everything that followed and found it wanting. And nothing in the present can compete with that version, because that version has been polished by memory and grief into something cleaner and more perfect than it ever actually was. You've edited out the difficulty, the disappointments, the ways it was already showing cracks. What you're holding on to is a highlight reel, and you're measuring your current life against the highlight reel and finding your current life insufficient. You're holding on to the possibility, the version of how it could have gone, the relationship that existed in the adjacent possible. If they had been different, if the timing had been different, if you had been different, if the circumstances had shifted slightly in any of 100 ways, that version is so real to you that you can feel it and you keep living in it in the space of what could have been. Because the what could have been is still alive and the what actually was is over. And the possibility won't let you go because you won't let it go. You keep it alive by visiting it, by thinking about it, by organizing your emotional life around its continued existence inside you. You're holding on to the identity of someone who is in this, because letting go means letting go of that identity too. The person who loved them, who was part of that thing, who is still in the process of that story. And becoming someone who is in it, who has moved past it, who is in something different now. That requires a new version of yourself. And new versions of yourself require the old version to end. And endings are their own kind of loss, even when they're losses of things that were hurting you. Here's what the holding on is doing to you right now, specifically in your daily life, in ways you might have stopped noticing because they become so familiar. It's occupying your present. The mental and emotional real estate that the holding on takes up is not nothing. It's significant. It's the bandwidth you're spending on something that is over and cannot be changed, taken from the bandwidth available for things that are current and can be affected. You are less present in your own life right now than you would be if you weren't holding on. The conversations you're half in, the opportunities you're partially missing, the people in front of you who are getting a distracted elsewhere version of you, while the holding on gets your full attention. It's keeping the wound open. Grief, when it's allowed to move, has a natural arc. It's painful, it's significant, it takes real time, but it moves, it processes, it becomes something you carry differently over time. The holding on interrupts that arc. Every time you return to the thing, revisit the memories, replay the conversations, check their social media, return to the story of what happened, you are reopening something that was trying to close. You are resetting the grief. You are keeping yourself at the beginning of something that was meant to eventually have a middle and an end. The holding on is keeping you in the first chapter on a loop. It's preventing the next thing from arriving. Not because the next thing requires you to stop caring. It doesn't. But because you are not actually available right now, you're taken. Not in a relationship technically, but occupied your emotional attention is elsewhere. The space where someone new could find purchase, where a different version of your life could begin to take root, is filled with the thing you haven't put down yet. And the next thing, whatever it is, whoever they are, can sense that, can feel the occupation, and gives you space accordingly. You're alone in part because you've made yourself unavailable to the things that could change that. I want to talk about the difference between grieving and holding on, because they can look similar from the outside and feel similar from the inside. And the distinction matters. Grieving is active, it moves towards something, it sits with the loss, feels it fully, acknowledges what it was and what it meant, and what the world looks like now that it's gone. It's painful and it's real, and it doesn't pretend that the thing that ended wasn't significant. But it faces the ending, It lets the ending be real. It processes in the direction of eventually being on the other side. Holding on is circular. It moves around the same points, returns to the same memories, asks the same questions. It doesn't face the ending, it resists the ending. It keeps the thing alive inside you through the ongoing act of refusing to let it settle into the past. It looks like grief because it's painful, but it doesn't move. It just hurts in the same place over and over. You can tell the difference by asking, am I moving through this or am I living in it? Moving through something feels like a river. You're in the current, it's carrying you somewhere. There are difficult parts, but there's direction. Living in something feels like a room you can't leave. Familiar, fixed, everything in the same place every time you come back. If you've been in the same emotional room for months, you're not grieving anymore. You're holding on. Let me talk about why. Because I don't think people hold on because they're weak or irrational or incapable of moving forward. I think there are specific, understandable reasons that have nothing to do with strength. The first is that letting go feels like agreeing that it's over, that it was what it was and nothing more, that the version of things you wanted is not available. And there's a part of you that is not ready to agree, that still believes on some level that if you hold on long enough, something might change, that the situation might shift, that they might come back, that the possibility you've been living in might somehow become real. Letting go means closing that possibility. And closing possibilities, especially ones that contain something real, is genuinely difficult. It requires accepting a reality that is smaller than what you wanted. The second is that the pain of holding on is familiar. And familiar, even when it's painful, is less frightening than the unfamiliar. Letting go means entering territory you haven't been in. A version of your life that doesn't have this thing in it. Days that aren't organized around the presence or absence of this person. Feelings you haven't felt in a while. Not the grief ones, but the other ones. The ones that belong to a life that isn't in recovery. The letting go is a doorway into the unknown, and the unknown is frightening in ways that the familiar pain isn't. The third is that the holding on is a way of honoring it, of saying, this mattered enough that I can't just put it down, that the depth of the grief is proportionate to the depth of the love, that letting go easily would mean it wasn't real. And you need it to have been real, you need the significance of what you felt to be validated by the difficulty of releasing it. Those are understandable reasons. They're not reasons to keep holding on indefinitely, but they're reasons. And understanding them is part of what makes it possible to eventually choose differently. I want to talk about what you lose by holding on, not the obvious things. The peace, the forward motion, the energy spent. The less obvious things, the ones that accumulate quietly while the holding on occupies the foreground. You lose your neutrality about new people, because the holding on creates a comparison that every new person has to pass through without knowing they're being compared, and they can't win. Nobody wins when they're being measured against someone you've been polishing in memory for months. Every potential connection gets filtered through the question, does this feel as real as that did? And the answer is almost always no, because what you had was real, and time and grief have made it more vivid, not less. And new things are always less vivid than old things until they become old things themselves. You lose your ability to be fully in a room. This one sounds small and is actually enormous. The capacity to be genuinely, completely present in whatever is happening right now, with the people in front of you in the moment you're actually in, that capacity is diminished by the holding on, not destroyed. Diminished. There is always a small part of you that is elsewhere. At the edge of your attention, the thing you haven't put down pulls quietly. And the people in your life are getting 90% of you when they deserve 100. And you are getting 90% of your own life when you could be fully in it. You lose access to joy that doesn't feel guilty. Because when you're holding on, good moments come with a shadow. You feel something light, genuine laughter, a real connection, a moment of ease. And immediately there's this quiet guilt. Like allowing yourself to feel good is a betrayal of the significance of what you lost. Like healing means it didn't matter enough, so you keep yourself in a slight undertow, never quite letting the good things fully arrive. Holding on becomes a way of maintaining the right amount of suffering to prove the love was real. The love was real. You don't have to keep suffering indefinitely to prove it. There's something important I want to say about the person you've been holding on to this whole time. They have moved, maybe not far, maybe not happily. Maybe they're in their own version of this, holding their own things, struggling in their own ways, but they are living in the present tense while you have been partly living in the past one. The days have been passing for them the same way the days have been passing for you. Life has been continuing on their end. And a version of them you're holding on to, the one preserved in your memory at the point when things were best, or the one in the adjacent possible, where everything went differently. That version is not accessible. It doesn't exist in the current moment. It exists only inside you, which means the only person being affected by the holding on is you. They are not held by your holding on, you are. That's important to sit with, because sometimes we hold on as if the holding on is maintaining something, as if letting go would erase what was real. But what was real doesn't depend on your continued holding of it. It was real. It happened. It shaped you. It will always have been true. Letting go doesn't unmake it. It just releases you from the job of carrying it. So what does letting go actually look like? Because I think people avoid it partly because they imagine it as a single dramatic moment, a decision made, a door closed, an immediate and clean transition from holding on to moving forward. It's not like that. It's slower and less clean and more non-linear than that. It looks like making the decision once and then making it again the next day. When the grief comes back, it looks like acknowledging, I am choosing to release this, and then feeling the full weight of what releasing it means, and sitting in that weight instead of running back to the holding on for relief. It looks like building a life that doesn't have room for the holding on to be the center of it, not by suppressing or avoiding, by filling, by investing in the present, by saying yes to things that are current and real, rather than returning constantly to the thing that is past and finished. It looks like grieving properly, fully, without cutting it short because it's uncomfortable, and without extending it indefinitely because you confused the grief with the love. The grief is not the love. The grief is just what happens when something real ends. You can love what you had and still let the grief move through to completion, and it looks like forgiving yourself for how long it took, because you are holding on for reasons that made sense to you. And the timeline of your healing is yours and not subject to the judgment of anyone, including yourself, who thinks you should have been further along by now. Holding on is hurting you more than the loss did. That's the truth of it. The loss was real and painful and you didn't deserve it. But the loss was a single event. The holding on has been a sustained choice, made daily, to keep something that's over alive inside you at the cost of the life that's trying to start. You get to make a different choice. Not once, many times probably before it sticks. But the choice is available. Today and tomorrow and the day after that. Open your hands deliberately, not because what you had wasn't worth holding, because you are worth more than a life spent holding something that's already gone. The next thing is waiting, not to replace what this was. Nothing replaces what was real. Just to be what comes after. Just to be the part of your story that hasn't been written yet because you've been too busy holding the chapter that ended. Turn the page. You've more than earned the next one. I used to believe that people stayed. I really did. I believed that the ones you let in, the ones you trusted, the ones you loved, they would always be there. That some bonds were unbreakable. That some people were permanent fixtures in your life. But life has a way of showing you the truth. It starts small, a friend who doesn't reply for weeks, a partner who drifts away without explanation, a sibling who moves on with their own life and forgets the moments you thought mattered. I remember the first time I felt it for real. I called someone I trusted, someone I thought would answer no matter what. And there was nothing. Just the ringing, the silence, the empty void where connection used to be. And in that silence, it hit me. People leave. Not always because they want to, not always because they mean to, but sometimes just because life moves on without them. I kept trying to hold on. I tried texting, calling, making plans, being available. I gave more than I should have, sacrificed comfort, and ignored red flags. I wanted them to stay. I wanted the certainty of their presence in my life, but they didn't. And every time someone left, I asked myself the same question. Was it me? Was I not enough? Was I too much? Was I too quiet, too loud, too complicated, too simple? I overanalyzed everything, replayed every conversation, every laugh, every glance, trying to find the moment they decided to leave. And slowly that questioning becomes a pattern. You start expecting departure before it even happens. You brace for absence before it touches you. You begin to withdraw, to protect yourself from the inevitable pain. Because the truth is, the people you love, the ones you open your heart to, they don't always stay. And the weight of that realization hits harder than the loss itself. I stayed loyal, I stayed caring, I stayed present. And yet, one by one, they left. And every time it happened, I felt smaller, less certain, less safe, less myself. I began to notice the pattern. I saw the fleeting nature of human attention, of human connection. I realized that attachment doesn't guarantee permanence, that love, effort, and devotion don't always secure someone's presence. And the hardest part, the leaving isn't always dramatic, it isn't always loud or angry. Most of the time it's quiet, invisible, a slow fade until you're left staring at the empty space they used to fill. And in that silence, the doubt creeps in. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm unlovable. Maybe everyone leaves because I'm not enough. I want you to understand this part because it's the moment that defines everything that comes after. The moment you see that no matter how much you give, no matter how much you care, some people just leave. And it leaves a hole, a hollow ache that isn't just missing someone, it's missing the certainty that someone was supposed to stay. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just them leaving, it was me too. Not that I caused it, not that I pushed them away intentionally, but I realized I had been carrying people the way you carry fragile glass, careful, hopeful, afraid to let go. I gave everything I had, my time, my trust, my heart, without measuring if it was returned. And when they left, I felt betrayed. But the betrayal wasn't entirely theirs. Part of it was mine. Part of it was believing permanence was guaranteed, believing that love alone could anchor someone who wasn't ready to stay. I started noticing patterns. The friends who left when I needed them most, the people who only stayed when life was convenient, the ones I chased, overanalyzed, overexplained myself to. It wasn't that I wasn't lovable. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that I was giving to people who weren't prepared to meet me where I stood. I had built my sense of security around others' presence instead of my own. I let my happiness hinge on messages that may never come, on plans that may never be kept, on people who could leave without warning. And in doing so, I allowed absence to feel like failure. I began to question why I kept myself open to that pain. Why did I care more than they did? Why did I stay longer than they could? Why did I invest my energy in people who didn't match it? And slowly, painfully, I understood. It wasn't about them leaving. It was about me learning, about recognizing my patterns of overgiving, of chasing, of hoping for something that was never fully mine, about understanding that my heart was generous, yes, but it needed boundaries, that care and devotion are valuable, but only when matched. I realized I had been mistaking attachment for love, persistence for connection, hope for reality, and that realization cut deep. Because the truth is, attachment without reciprocity isn't love. It's longing, and longing without response is a weight no one should carry forever. I began to see how my fears of abandonment, of not being enough, had shaped every interaction. I stayed longer than I should have. I gave more than I needed. I pretended that absence didn't hurt. And the more I did, the more I trained myself to accept the inevitable. Everyone leaves in the end. But the key wasn't to stop caring. The key wasn't to build walls so high no one could reach me. The key was to notice the pattern, to understand my own role in it, to reclaim the power I had been giving away. It wasn't easy. Recognition always hurts. Self-reflection always burns. But understanding the why behind the pain was the first step toward freedom. And in that understanding, I began to glimpse something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Possibility. Not for them, not for the ones who left, but for me. Possibility that I could show up differently. Possibility that I could care without losing myself. Possibility that love didn't have to end with leaving. I started changing the way I showed up. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, I stopped over-explaining myself. I stopped chasing texts, calls, or attention that wasn't freely given. I stopped bending over backward to prove my worth. Instead of hoping people would stay, I watched how they treated me. I matched energy instead of giving more than I received. I let the ones who weren't consistent drift away without argument, without guilt, and for the first time in a long time, it felt calm. I learned the power of boundaries, real ones, not just the ones I whispered to myself at night. Boundaries that said, I will not stay in a space where I am not wanted. I will not beg for care. I will not diminish myself to keep someone around. Boundaries that felt like armor, but also like freedom. I realized something important. Leaving isn't always their choice. Sometimes it's a reflection of their own lives, their own struggles. Sometimes they leave because they can't stay. And that's not my failure. That's not a reflection of my worth. I started to internalize it. My love didn't have to be reciprocated to be valid. My care didn't have to be rewarded to matter. And the truth was, I was allowed to step back, to protect my heart, to save myself from the endless cycle of longing and loss. I practiced observing instead of reacting. I observed patterns. I observed moments where I felt drained, unnoticed, unappreciated. I observed my own feelings without judgment, and each time I reminded myself, I am enough. My presence matters. My energy is valuable. It wasn't about becoming cold or bitter. It was about becoming steady, calm, certain, about knowing my worth even when others didn't, about understanding that someone leaving didn't erase what I had to give. It just meant I had to give it to someone ready to receive it. And in that steadiness, something shifted. The panic I used to feel when someone didn't reply immediately started to fade. The ache I felt when plans fell through became manageable. I didn't stop caring. I didn't stop loving. I stopped sacrificing myself for the illusion of permanence. It was a quiet power, the kind that doesn't scream or demand. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine. And for the first time, I felt anchored not by someone else's presence, but by my own. I began to see life differently. People would leave. It was inevitable, but I didn't have to leave myself behind with them. I could show up fully, openly, honestly, and still walk away when it wasn't returned. I could value my heart enough to protect it, even when it hurt to do so. And that hurt. It was different now. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't panic. It was acknowledgement. It was understanding. It was a lesson, a refining fire, a guide for how to move forward without losing myself. And then one day I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping anymore. I wasn't measuring my worth against who stayed or who left. I was standing firmly in my own life, in my own heart, and it was enough. I still feel the ache of absence sometimes, but it doesn't define me. I don't need people to validate my presence. I don't need anyone to choose me to feel whole. I've learned that care is powerful, but self-respect is stronger. That love is generous, but boundaries protect the soul. I began showing up differently. I still care, yes, but selectively. I still give, yes, but intentionally. I still open my heart, yes, but to those who are ready to meet me there. And every time someone leaves, it no longer shatters me. It informs me. It reminds me of the patterns I no longer repeat. I stopped chasing ghosts. I stopped hoping for consistency from those who had none to give. I stopped believing that permanence was guaranteed. And in that clarity, I found freedom. Freedom to grieve without guilt. Freedom to love without fear. Freedom to exist without needing permission. The truth is, everyone leaves in the end. But that doesn't mean I am left behind. It doesn't mean my love is wasted. It doesn't mean my heart is broken beyond repair. It means I am human. It means I am learning. It means I am growing. And in that growth, I found something stronger than attachment. Myself. I walk through life knowing that people may come, people may go, and that's okay. Because I am steady. Because I am whole. Because I am not defined by who chooses to stay, but by how fiercely I choose to honor my own heart. And that changes everything. I stayed. I grew. I am ready now. Overthinking is killing you. Not literally, but close enough that the word fits. Because what overthinking actually does, what it does to your sleep, your relationships, your ability to just exist in a moment without immediately analyzing it to death, is a slow, quiet kind of damage. The kind that doesn't show up on anything. The kind nobody around you can see. The kind you can't even fully explain to someone who doesn't live inside it. You just know that your brain never stops. That there is no off switch. That the moment something happens, something good, something bad, something completely neutral, a part of you immediately picks it up and starts turning it over, looking for meaning, looking for threat, looking for the thing underneath the thing, and you're exhausted, not from your life, from your own head. That's what I want to talk about, not in an abstract way, in the specific, honest, this is actually what it does to you way that I think most people who overthink have never had fully named for them. Let me start with what it actually costs you. Because I think we talk about overthinking like it's a personality quirk, like it's just how some people are wired and it's fine, it's manageable. Drink some chamomile tea and journal about it. It's not fine. It's costing you real things. It's costing you your present. Every moment you spend living inside a conversation that already happened or a scenario that hasn't happened yet is a moment you are not actually in your life. Not in the room, not with the people in front of you, not feeling what there is to feel right now. You're somewhere else in the past replaying something you can't change, or in the future preparing for something that might never arrive. And the present just keeps passing, quietly, without you in it. It's costing you your relationships because overthinking doesn't stay internal. It bleeds out. It changes how you communicate. You either over-explain because your brain has run every possible misinterpretation and you're trying to preempt all of them, or you go completely quiet because saying anything feels like opening a door you won't be able to close. It makes you pull back at exactly the moments you should be moving closer. It makes you read distance into things that aren't distant and miss the actual warning signs because you're too busy analyzing the fake ones. It's costing you your confidence. Every decision that should be simple becomes a referendum on your judgment. Every choice carries the weight of all the ways it could go wrong. And over time, all that second guessing teaches you that you can't be trusted, that your instincts are unreliable, that before you do anything you need to think it through one more time, just to be sure. One more time becomes the only time you ever operate, and you stop trusting yourself completely. here's the part I want to name that doesn't get named enough. Overthinking feels productive. That's the trap. That's why it's so hard to stop. Like when you're running every scenario, when you're analyzing every angle, when you're preparing responses to conversations that haven't happened yet, it feels like you're doing something, like you're being responsible, thorough, like you're the kind of person who thinks things through instead of just reacting. But there's a difference between thinking something through and thinking it to death. Thinking something through has an endpoint. You gather the information, you consider the options, you make a call. Overthinking has no endpoint. It circles, it loops back. It generates new questions every time it answers one. It is thinking that has gotten detached from any useful destination and is now just running, because running is what it does. You're not solving anything, you're just spinning. And the spinning feels like work, so you keep doing it. And meanwhile, the actual thing, the decision, the conversation, the moment, either passes or gets worse because you waited too long inside your own head to address it. And that's the cost. You prepare endlessly for a life you're not actually living. I want to talk about relationships specifically because I think that's where overthinking does its cruelest work. You meet someone, or you're already with someone, and something small happens. A text that's slightly shorter than usual, a tone that's slightly different, a moment where they seem somewhere else, something that a non-overthinking brain would register and file under. Probably nothing. Your brain does not file it under probably nothing. Your brain picks it up and immediately starts building. What did that mean? Why was it different? Is something wrong? Did I do something? Are they pulling away? Is this the beginning of the end? And within 20 minutes you have constructed an entire narrative, detailed, internally consistent, emotionally devastating, about something that was probably just them being tired. And now you're responding to that narrative instead of to reality. You're quieter with them because of the story your brain wrote. You're more careful, more guarded, slightly more distant, and they notice, and of course they notice, and they adjust to your adjustment. And now there actually is a slight distance between you. Not because anything was wrong, because your brain made something out of nothing and you responded to the something and created a version of the nothing that is now real. You worried the thing into existence. That happens more than you think. The distance you're always afraid of, the one you're constantly scanning for, sometimes you're the one creating it, not intentionally, not consciously, just by living inside the story your brain built instead of the reality that was actually there. There's something I want to say about the specific exhaustion of being an overthinker in a relationship with someone who isn't, because the gap between those two processing styles is genuinely one of the hardest things to bridge. You bring something up gently, carefully after having thought about how to phrase it for 3 days, and they look at you and say something like, "I don't know, I wasn't really thinking anything by it," and they mean it. They genuinely weren't thinking anything by it. It was just a thing they said or did, and they've already moved on and they have no idea you've been carrying the weight of it for 72 hours. And you don't know whether to feel relieved or more anxious, because if they weren't thinking anything by it, then all of that was in your head. And if all of that was in your head, how much other stuff is in your head? And if you can't tell the difference between real signals and fabricated ones, how do you ever trust your own read on anything? So the conversation you tried to have to get clarity ends up producing more questions than it answered, and the cycle starts again. That's not a communication problem. That's not a compatibility problem. That's overthinking making a relationship harder than it needs to be by introducing a third party into every interaction, the version of the other person that exists in your head, running their lines in the scenarios you've scripted, behaving in the ways your anxiety has assigned them. That third party is not real, but they take up a lot of space. Let me talk about where this comes from. Not in a blame your childhood way, though honestly sometimes it is partly that, but in the way that's useful. The way that helps you understand the mechanism so you can start to work with it instead of just being run by it. Overthinking is almost always rooted in one of two things, sometimes both at once. The first is a history of things going wrong in ways you didn't see coming. If you've been blindsided before, hurt in a way you didn't anticipate, by someone you trusted, in a situation you thought was safe, your brain learns a lesson. The lesson is you didn't see it coming last time and it cost you. So this time you will see it coming. This time you will watch for it. This time you will be ready. And your brain takes that lesson seriously. It starts scanning constantly for anything that could be an early signal, for any pattern that resembles the one that came before the hurt. It gets very good at finding those patterns, partly because they're real sometimes, and partly because if you look hard enough at anything, you can make it resemble almost any pattern you're searching for. The second root is a low-grade belief that things won't work out for you specifically, that good things are fragile and temporary and will be taken away, that you are, in some fundamental way, more likely to lose what you love than to keep it. And so the overthinking is partly preparation. If you can anticipate the loss, you can brace for it. You can be ready, and partly a way of maintaining a small amount of control in situations where you feel fundamentally out of control. Neither of those routes make you broken. They make you someone who learned to protect themselves in the only way that made sense at the time. The problem is that protection has outlasted the thing it was protecting against, and now it's protecting you from things that aren't actually threatening. And the protection itself is the thing doing the damage. I want to talk about what overthinking does to your sense of self, because I think this is the part that goes most unacknowledged and does the deepest damage. When you overthink long enough, and when you spend enough time living inside hypothetical versions of events rather than actual ones, you start to lose the thread of who you actually are underneath all the analysis. Because overthinking requires you to constantly model other people, to simulate how they see you, what they think of you, how they're interpreting your words and actions. And the more you do that, the more your sense of yourself becomes contingent on those simulations. You start to know yourself primarily through the imagined eyes of other people. Your self-image becomes a composite of all the ways you've imagined being perceived. That's not a self, that's a performance with no audience. And the real you, the one with instincts and preferences and reactions that don't need to be analyzed before they're allowed to exist, that person gets quieter and quieter the longer the machine runs. Because every time a feeling or an instinct arises, the overthinking brain immediately intercepts it, runs it through the filter, asks whether it's appropriate, whether it's too much, whether expressing it will cause a problem. And most of the time, the feeling gets managed instead of felt, processed instead of expressed, filed away instead of lived. You become someone who is very good at understanding emotions and very unpracticed at actually having them in real time. That's a loss, a quiet, accumulating, significant loss. Here's what nobody tells you about trying to stop overthinking. You cannot think your way out of overthinking. I know how obvious that sounds. I know. But it's genuinely the trap that most people fall into. You start overthinking about why you overthink. You analyze your patterns, you construct frameworks for understanding your anxiety, you research it, you journal about it, you build elaborate systems for catching yourself in the act. And all of that is more thinking, more spinning. You've just redirected the machine at itself and called it progress. The actual movement happens somewhere other than your head. It happens in your body, in learning to notice when you've left the present moment, and practicing the physical act of returning to it. It happens in action, and making the small decision without running it through the full analysis, and finding out that the sky doesn't fall, and slowly building evidence that your instincts are actually okay. It happens in relationships and telling someone what's happening inside you instead of managing it alone, and finding out that being known doesn't destroy things the way you were afraid it would. It happens slowly, non-linearly, with setbacks that feel like starting over but aren't. And it requires you to do the thing that overthinking was always trying to prevent. Be uncertain. Be in something without knowing how it ends. Be present in a moment without having already lived 6 versions of it in your head. That is genuinely terrifying if you are someone who has been using certainty, even imaginary certainty, as a survival tool. But the alternative is staying in the machine, and the machine is running you into the ground. I want to say something directly to the version of you that is reading this at whatever hour this is, probably not sleeping. Probably turning something over that started as a small thing 3 hours ago and has since become a fully constructed crisis. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You are not fundamentally unable to have peace. You are someone whose brain learned to be very, very busy, and busy kept you safe once, and now busy is just busy. It's not keeping you safe. It's keeping you from resting, from connecting, from being in your own life without the constant background noise of what if and what does it mean and what's going to happen. The thought you're carrying right now, the one that feels urgent, the one that feels like if you just think about it a little longer, you'll finally land on the answer that makes it okay. That thought is lying to you. The answer isn't in more thinking. The answer is in putting it down long enough to find out that the world didn't end when you stopped holding it. You are allowed to rest. Now you've figured it all out. Now, before the resolution, before the certainty, before you've run every scenario to its conclusion. Now, in the middle of not knowing, that's the only place rest is ever actually available. Overthinking is killing you slowly, stealing your sleep, your presence, your relationships, your trust in yourself, your ability to just be somewhere without immediately trying to understand and analyze and prepare for what being there might mean. You know this. You've known this. The problem was never that you didn't understand the damage. The problem is that stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. But you've been doing this long enough now to know that the danger isn't out there. It was never really out there. It was always in here. In the machine, in the loop, in the version of events your brain constructed and then handed you to live inside of. The real thing, your actual life, the people actually in it, the moments actually happening, that's been waiting for you this whole time, just on the other side of the noise. All you have to do is let the noise get a little quieter, not gone, Just quieter. That's enough. That's all it takes to start. You know what hurts the most? It's not being rejected. It's realizing the person you care about never felt the same way to begin with. Not in the way you did. Not in the way you hoped they did. And the worst part is, you didn't realize it right away. Because at first everything felt real. The conversations felt natural. The laughs felt genuine. The late night talks felt personal. There were moments where it seemed like something deeper was building between you. Little moments that made you believe this could actually turn into something. And when you start believing that, your heart slowly gets involved. Not all at once, but piece by piece. You start paying more attention to them. You notice the way their voice changes when they're excited. The way they talk about the things they care about. The way their mood shifts when something's bothering them. You start remembering small details about them without even trying. Things they mentioned once in passing. Their favorite music, their favorite food, the stories about their past, and without realizing it, they begin taking up more space in your mind. You think about them when something funny happens. You think about them when you hear a song they would like. You think about them when something reminds you of a conversation you once had. That's how feelings grow, quietly, naturally, without asking permission. But somewhere along the way, something starts to feel different, not wrong, just uneven. You notice that you're always the one starting conversations. You're the one asking questions, the one keeping things going, the one making the effort to stay connected. They still respond. They still talk to you. They still laugh and joke like everything is normal. But something about it feels lighter for them. Like they're enjoying the moment, but not investing in it the same way you are. And you try not to think too much about it because you don't want to ruin what you have. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself they might just be busy or distracted or maybe just not good at expressing their feelings. So you keep showing up, you keep being patient, you keep being kind. Because part of you believes that if you're consistent enough, if you're supportive enough, if you care enough, maybe one day something will change. Maybe one day they'll look at you differently. Maybe one day they'll realize you were there all along. Maybe one day the feeling will finally grow on their side too. But deep down, there's a quiet fear you try not to face. A small voice that keeps asking the same question. What if they never feel the same way? And that thought is something your heart isn't ready to accept yet. Title: She Doesn't Feel the Same Way. Part 2. The hardest part isn't the moment you realize she doesn't feel the same way. It's everything that happens before that moment. The waiting, the hoping, the convincing yourself that maybe you just need to give it more time. Because feelings don't always grow instantly, right? Sometimes people just need space. Sometimes they need to see your consistency. Sometimes they need to realize what's right in front of them. At least that's what you keep telling yourself. So you keep showing up. You keep answering her messages. You keep making time for her even when your day is busy. You listen when she talks about her problems. You support her when she's stressed. You try to be the person she can always rely on, the person who understands her, the person who stays. And slowly, you start building this idea in your head, not just about who she is, but about who the two of you could be together. You imagine simple things, conversations that haven't happened yet, moments that might happen someday, little scenarios where everything finally clicks into place. And those thoughts feel good. They make the waiting feel worth it. They make the uncertainty easier to ignore. Because as long as there's still a possibility, you don't have to let go of the hope. But reality has a quiet way of revealing itself. Not all at once. Not with some dramatic moment. Just small things that slowly start adding up. Like the way she talks about someone else, not realizing how it lands when she says it. Or how she mentions a guy she finds attractive. Like it's just normal conversation. Like it wouldn't affect you. Or the way she disappears for hours, sometimes days, then comes back like nothing happened. And you're just happy she replied at all. Even if the message is short, even if the effort feels minimal, you start noticing the imbalance. But you don't want to believe it means something, because admitting the truth would mean facing a reality you've been avoiding. That maybe you care more than she ever will. That maybe you've been building something in your mind that she never intended to build with you. And the worst part is, she didn't lie to you. She didn't promise anything. She didn't say the words that would make you believe she felt the same way. You just filled in the silence yourself. You interpreted the kindness as something deeper, The attention is something meaningful. The connection is something mutual, but kindness isn't always love. Attention isn't always interest, and connection doesn't always mean someone sees you the way you see them. And slowly, the truth starts getting harder to ignore, not because she suddenly tells you, but because her actions begin saying something your heart can't keep pretending not to hear. She doesn't feel the same way, and the longer you hold on to hope, the heavier that realization becomes. At some point, the truth stops whispering, and it starts becoming impossible to ignore. Not because she finally sits you down and says the words. Most of the time that conversation never even happens. The truth shows up in quieter ways than that. It shows up in patterns, in effort, in the way someone chooses to show up in your life, or the way they don't. You start noticing things you used to overlook. How you're always the one starting the conversation. How if you stop texting first, the silence stretches longer than you expected. Hours, sometimes days, and eventually you break. You send the message anyway, because pretending you don't care feels harder than admitting that you do. You start noticing the energy difference too. How excited you are when she replies, and how normal it seems for her, like your presence in her life is something she can take or leave, not something she's worried about losing. That realization hurts in a very specific way, because you're not asking for everything. You're not asking for grand gestures or dramatic confessions. You're just asking for something simple, to feel chosen. But when someone truly wants you, you don't have to beg for that feeling. You don't have to analyze every message. You don't have to question whether you matter. It becomes obvious, and that's when the realization finally hits you. Not all at once, but slowly, like a weight settling on your chest. She doesn't feel the same way. Not in the way you hoped. Not in the way you needed. Maybe she likes you. Maybe she enjoys talking to you. Maybe she appreciates having you around. But there's a difference between appreciating someone and wanting to build something with them. And you start asking yourself questions you were too afraid to ask before. Was I just convenient? Was I just someone who was always there when she needed attention? Was I just filling space in her life while she waited for someone else? Those thoughts sting. But the deeper pain isn't even about her, it's about what you did to yourself while hoping things would change. How long you ignored your own feelings. How long you accepted less than you deserved. How long you told yourself to be patient, when patience wasn't the solution. Because love doesn't grow out of one person trying harder. Love doesn't appear just because you stayed long enough. Love isn't something you can earn by proving your loyalty, and realizing that forces you to face a difficult truth. You can't make someone feel something they don't, no matter how good you are to them, no matter how much you care, no matter how much you wish it were different. And once that truth settles in, you're left with a choice, one that hurts either way. Keep holding on to someone who never chose you, or finally let go, even though part of you still wishes she would. Because the hardest thing about loving someone who doesn't feel the same way isn't losing them, it's accepting that you were never really theirs to begin with. At first, letting go doesn't feel like strength, it feels like defeat, like you're walking away from something that could have worked. If only things were slightly different. If only she saw you the way you saw her. If only she realized how much you cared. If only timing was better. If only you had said the right thing at the right moment. Your mind keeps replaying those what ifs over and over again, because your heart would rather believe in a small chance than accept a painful truth. But eventually something starts to shift inside you. Not dramatically, not overnight, just slowly. You start noticing how tired you are. Tired of hoping, tired of waiting, tired of checking your phone for a message that may or may not come, tired of feeling like your happiness depends on someone else's attention. And that's when a different kind of realization hits you, one that hurts, but also frees you. You didn't lose her because you never had her. What you lost was the version of her you created in your mind, the version that loved you back, the version that chose you, the version that saw your worth the same way you saw hers. But that version never actually existed. It was just hope, and hope can be beautiful, but when it's built on the wrong person, it slowly becomes something painful. You start seeing things more clearly, how much effort you gave, how much patience you showed, how much of yourself you poured into someone who never asked for it. And instead of feeling embarrassed about that, you begin to understand something important. There's nothing wrong with loving deeply. There's nothing wrong with caring. There's nothing wrong with believing in someone. The only mistake is giving all of that to someone who was never willing to meet you halfway. And the truth is, one day you're going to meet someone who does. Someone who doesn't make you question where you stand. Someone who doesn't make you guess how they feel. Someone who doesn't make you feel like loving them is a risk. Because when someone truly wants you, you won't have to convince them. You won't have to compete for their attention. You won't have to sit there wondering if you're enough. They'll show you clearly, consistently, without confusion. And when that happens, you'll look back at this version of yourself. The one who stayed too long, the one who hoped too hard, the one who loved someone who couldn't love him back. And instead of feeling regret, you'll feel something else. Gratitude. Because that experience didn't break you. It taught you. It taught you what love shouldn't feel like. And most importantly, it taught you that the right person will never leave you wondering why they don't feel the same way. Because when someone truly loves you, you'll never have to ask that question again. This one is going to be uncomfortable. Not because I'm going to be cruel about it. Not because I think you're a bad person or that you deserve to hurt more than you already do. But because I think you've been telling yourself a story about what happened. A very comfortable, very sympathetic, very well-constructed story. And I think that story is costing you more than the heartbreak itself. And I'd rather say the hard thing than watch you carry a version of events that keeps you stuck. So, here it is. Some of what happened was your fault. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but some of it. A real, significant, honest sum. And you know that. Somewhere underneath the narrative you've been running, underneath the anger and the grief and the very reasonable pain, you know that you had a hand in this. You know there were things you did or didn't do, patterns you ran, moments where you chose the comfortable thing over the right thing, and that those choices contributed to the ending. And instead of sitting with that, you've been covering it, building a story around the parts that make you the injured party, collecting evidence for the version where this was done to you, not participated in by you. I understand why. I really do. Grief is hard enough without also having to hold accountability for it. When something ends and it hurts this much, the last thing you want to do is look at your own role in the wreckage. But the coping, the stories, the justifications, the careful editing of memory, that's not protecting you. That's just delaying the thing that would actually help. Let me tell you what the coping sounds like. Because I think a lot of us do this without fully recognizing it as what it is. It sounds like they were emotionally unavailable. Which may be true, but it doesn't ask the question of why you stayed with someone emotionally unavailable for as long as you did. It doesn't ask what that unavailability was doing for you, whether it let you stay at a safe distance too, whether it meant you never had to be feely seen, whether their unavailability was, on some level, a feature rather than a bug. It sounds like they didn't appreciate me, which may also be true, but it doesn't ask whether you made yourself easy to appreciate, whether you communicated what you needed clearly, whether you showed up as the full version of yourself or a managed, careful version designed to be likable, whether you were actually present in the relationship or just there. It sounds like I gave everything and got nothing back. And I want to be careful here because sometimes this is just true, full stop, and you really were in something that took without returning. But sometimes, I gave everything as covering for something else. Sometimes giving everything is a way of controlling the dynamic. Sometimes the constant giving is designed unconsciously to put the other person in debt, to make leaving harder for them, to build a case in advance for why you're the good one if this falls apart. Giving can be generous. Giving can also be a strategy, and only you know which one it was. It sounds like they changed, but people don't usually change in a vacuum. Relationships change people. Your behavior in the relationship changes people. The environment you two created together changes both of you. When someone becomes distant or cold or checked out, it's worth asking, genuinely, honestly asking, what the environment was like. What was it like to be with you when things were hard? What they were responding to. I'm not saying it was your fault they changed. I'm saying change doesn't happen in isolation, and the story that casts you as the passive witness to someone else's transformation is probably missing some of your own. Here's the thing about the comfortable story. The one where you're the one who tried and they're the one who failed. The one where the ending is their fault and your pain is entirely undeserved and there's nothing to examine on your end. That story feels better in the short term. Of course it does. It protects you from the really uncomfortable work of looking at yourself clearly. It lets you stay in the grief without having to complicate it with accountability. It lets you be sad without also having to be honest. But it has a cost, a specific, measurable cost. The cost is that you take nothing from this into the next thing. You exit this relationship with the same patterns, the same blind spots, the same tendencies that contributed to the ending. Because you never looked at them, you never identified them, you never held them up to the light and said, this is a me thing, this is something I do, this needs to change, and then you do it again. Different person, same dynamic, different face on the same shape of relationship, and it ends the same way. And you tell the same story again, and the story protects you again, and you take nothing again. That loop is why some people go their entire lives in relationships that follow the same pattern and never understand why. Not because they're unlucky, because they're very good at being the protagonist of a story that never asks them to grow. I want to be specific about some of the things we do, the actual behaviors, because I think naming them is more useful than speaking in abstractions. We go cold when we should go honest. Something bothers us and something real and something worth addressing, and instead of saying it clearly, we pull back. We get quieter. We create distance. We let the temperature in the room drop and wait for the other person to notice and ask. And when they don't ask, or when they ask wrong or not enough or in the wrong tone, we take that as evidence that they don't care. When really what happened is we asked them to read our minds and they failed a test they didn't know they were taking. We punish in small ways. We're less warm after a fight. We remember and bring it up later. We keep score and then act like we're not keeping score. We do the thing where we say, I'm fine, while very clearly not being fine, and then resent them for believing us. We pick the wrong moments to be honest and then wonder why honesty doesn't go well. We drop something heavy right when they're stressed or exhausted or in the middle of something. And when the conversation doesn't go the way we needed, we add it to the list of evidence that they can't handle us, that they don't prioritize our feelings, that they're not equipped for this relationship. We confuse intimacy with intensity. We think fighting means we care. We think drama means depth. We manufacture urgency in relationships that are actually healthy and stable because health and stability feel boring, feel unfamiliar, feel like the absence of passion rather than the presence of something real. We love loudly in the beginning and quietly disappear as it gets more real. We're incredibly present and attentive in the early phase, and then once we feel secure, we coast. We stop putting in the effort that got us here because we think arrival means the work is done. It doesn't. Arrival is when the work starts. We make the other person responsible for our emotional state. When we're happy, it's because of them, and we tell them so. But when we're anxious or insecure or struggling, that's also because of them, their behavior, their distance, something they did or didn't do. We make them the weather of our inner life and then resent them for not always being sunny. We leave before we leave. We check out emotionally while still physically present. We stop investing in the thing months before it technically ends, and then when it ends, we act like we were fully in it right up to the last moment. We weren't. We'd already started protecting ourselves from a loss we were quietly engineering. Any of that land. Here's what I think is actually underneath the coping, because I don't think it's dishonesty. Exactly. I don't think most people sit down and consciously decide to distort what happened. I think it's fear. Specifically the fear that if you look at your role clearly, if you actually account for your part of the wreckage, you'll find something unfixable, something fundamentally wrong with you, some evidence that you are, at your core, the kind of person who ruins things, who doesn't know how to love correctly, who is too much or not enough or broken in some way that won't yield to effort. That's the fear underneath the story. The story protects you from having to find out if that fear is true. But here's what I want you to hear. Actually hear it. Looking at your part in something doesn't mean confirming your worst fears about yourself. It just means looking at behaviors, patterns, choices, things you did in specific moments for specific reasons that you can understand and, if you choose to, change. You are not your worst moments in a relationship. You are also not separate from them. They're data. They tell you something about where you were, what you needed, how you were operating, and that information is genuinely useful if you let yourself have it. The fear says if I look honestly, I'll find out I'm irredeemable. The truth is, if you look honestly, you'll find out you're human, imperfect and patterned, and sometimes self-protective in ways that hurt other people, just like every person who has ever been in a relationship. That's not a verdict, that's a starting point. Let me talk about what accountability actually looks like, because I think people avoid it partly because they imagine it as this punishing, self-flagellating thing, like looking honestly at yourself means spending months in a shame spiral, rehashing everything you did wrong, deciding you're terrible. That's not accountability, that's just shame with better lighting. Real accountability is quieter than that. It looks more like sitting down at some point when the sharpest grief has passed and asking yourself some honest questions, not rhetorical ones designed to confirm a narrative, actual ones. What did I do in this relationship that I wouldn't want someone to do to me? Not the obvious stuff, not the big fights or the bad days. The small, consistent stuff. The daily texture of how I showed up. What did I know was wrong and keep doing anyway? What did I avoid saying because saying it would have required me to change something I wasn't ready to change? Where was I unfair? Not just in the moments I already know about, the ones I've been editing out of the version I tell people. What did this person need from me that I wasn't willing to give? And was it actually something I couldn't give? Or just something I chose not to? Those questions are hard. They're supposed to be hard. But they're also genuinely useful in a way that no amount of righteous anger about what they did to you ever will be. Because the answers to those questions travel with you. They're portable. They go into the next relationship and make you better at it. They turn heartbreak into something that costs you once instead of costing you every time. There's one more thing I want to name before we get to the other side of this, and it's the one that's hardest to say because it implicates something we don't like to look at. Sometimes the coping isn't just about protecting yourself from accountability. Sometimes it's about protecting your image of yourself as a good person, as someone who loves well, as someone who, when relationships end, can look back and genuinely say, I tried, I was present, I gave it everything. That image matters to a lot of us, more than we admit. We want to be the person who loved honestly and got hurt anyway, not the person who contributed to their own heartbreak through avoidable choices. We want to be the protagonist of a love story, not the cautionary tale. And so we protect the image. We curate the memory. We tell the story to friends in a way that quietly omits the parts where we weren't our best selves. And slowly, through repetition, we start to believe the curated version. It becomes the real one. The messy, complicated actual version gets buried under the one that makes us look okay. But you can't grow from a version of yourself that you've cleaned up for public consumption. You grow from the real one, the one that includes the moments you're not proud of, the one that captures not just what happened, but how you made people feel, the one that honestly accounts for what you brought into the room, the insecurity, the patterns, the defense mechanisms, the ways you protected yourself that accidentally hurt someone else. And that version isn't shameful, it's just true. And truth is the only thing you can actually work with. I want to say something about the grief, because I don't want this to feel like I'm dismissing it. Your pain is real. Whatever happened, however complicated your role in it, the loss is real and the hurt is real, and you are allowed to feel all of it without having to earn it through perfect behavior. You don't have to have been blameless to deserve to grieve. The grief and the accountability can exist at the same time. In fact, I think that's the only way to actually heal from something like this, not choosing between feeling it and examining it, but doing both. Letting yourself hurt fully while also slowly, with compassion for yourself, looking at what's yours to own. Because the coping and the comfortable story, the edited version, it doesn't actually protect you from the pain. It just reroutes it. You still feel it, you still carry it. You just carry it alongside a story that keeps you from understanding it. And understanding it is what lets you put it down eventually. Not the story, the actual thing. The real account of what happened, your role in theirs, what was real and what was projected, what was love and what was fear wearing love's clothes. That understanding is the only version of this that leads somewhere. This story just leads back to the same place. So stop coping, or start slowly to stop. Not all at once, not by burning down every comforting thing you've been telling yourself in the one brutal session of self-examination. That's not useful either. Just start making room. Start allowing the possibility that the story you've been telling isn't the whole story. Start letting the questions in, not to punish yourself, but because you are curious about yourself and you deserve to know yourself accurately. Start being as honest with yourself about your own behavior as you are about theirs, Because here's what's true. The heartbreak you're carrying right now and the real weight of it, the part that won't quite heal, I don't think it's only about them. I think some of it is about you. About things you did that you wish you'd done differently. About the person you were in this relationship that you don't fully want to be. You know that. You've known it. You've just been covering it with everything else because sitting with it is hard and sitting with it feels like losing. But it's not losing, it's the beginning of actually getting somewhere. The pain doesn't go away when you stop coping, but it changes shape. It becomes something you can hold and look at and learn from instead of something that just lives in you without meaning. And meaning is the only thing that makes any of this worth what it cost. You already paid. You might as well take what you bought. You're always the loser. There's a version of losing that nobody prepares you for. Not the kind where you fail a test or lose a job or get broken up with in a parking lot while your hazards are still on. That kind of losing is clean. It hurts, but it has a shape. You know what you lost. You know when it happened. You can point to the moment and say, that's the one. That's where it went wrong. The kind I'm talking about doesn't have a moment. It's the kind where you keep showing up, keep trying, keep being the bigger person, keep choosing the high road, and somehow, at the end of all of it, you're still the one sitting alone wondering where you went wrong. You did everything right, or at least you did more right than wrong, and you still lost. Not once, every time, and you start to wonder if that's just your thing, if losing is just something that happens to you specifically. I've been thinking about this for a while now, not in a wallowing way, more like there's something here I haven't named yet, and I need to name it before it keeps running my life. Because I think most of us who always end up losing in relationships, friendships, romantic stuff, family stuff, doesn't matter. We don't lose because we're bad at this. We lose because of something that looks like a strength from the outside, something that people compliment us for, something we were taught was the right way to be. We lose because we care more. And I know how that sounds. I know I care too much is the thing everyone says when they want to avoid accountability. Like, yeah, sure, buddy, you care too much. That's why you burned the whole thing down. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the person who cares so much they become controlling or jealous or obsessive. That's a different thing. I'm talking about the person who genuinely, quietly, consistently loves people harder than those people love them back, and keeps doing it, and can't stop, and doesn't know why. That person always loses. Not dramatically, just slowly, over and over again. Let me back up. I think it starts young. Not in some deep trauma way. I'm not trying to make this a therapy session, but I do think most of us learned early what role we were playing, and some of us learned that our role was to be the one who holds things together. Maybe you were the kid who noticed when mom was in a mood and adjusted accordingly. Maybe you were the one in your friend group who everyone came to when stuff was falling apart. But when your stuff was falling apart, you kind of just handled it yourself because it felt like too much to ask. Maybe you were the sibling who kept the peace, the partner who apologized first even when you weren't wrong, just because the silence was too heavy. You learned that love looked like management, like anticipation, like making yourself small enough that everyone else could be big. And here's the thing, and it worked. People liked you, people needed you, people said you were the glue, the rock, the steady one. Nobody asked if the glue was tired, so you kept going. You got good at it, really good. You got so good at reading rooms and adjusting and being whatever the situation needed that you kind of forgot to figure out what you needed. Or maybe you knew somewhere, but asking for it felt like breaking a rule you didn't write, but somehow agreed to. And that pattern, that beautiful, exhausting, self-erasing pattern, follows you into every relationship you ever have. Here's how it plays out in practice. You meet someone, it could be a friend, could be someone you're falling for, doesn't matter. You connect, it feels real. And from the jump, you're in it, you're present. You remember the details, you follow up on the thing they mentioned 2 weeks ago. You show up when you said you would. You notice when something's off and you say something. They like this about you. They tell you. You're different, they say. You actually listen, you actually care, and you feel it. That warmth of being seen, of being valued, of finally being in something that feels like it matches what you've been putting out for years. Except, slowly, quietly, you start to notice the math doesn't add up. You text first most of the time. You're the one who makes the plan. When something good happens to you, you tell them, and they respond warmly but briefly and then pivot to themselves. And when something good happens to them, you ask follow-up questions. You want to know everything. You're genuinely excited for them. They don't do that for you. Not in the same way, and you tell yourself it's fine. People show love differently. You can't expect everyone to be exactly like you. That would be unfair. That would be projecting. So you keep going. But then something hard happens to you, something real, and you reach out and they're supportive, but it feels surface level, like they're being a good person in the way you are a good person to a coworker you don't know that well. Polite, present, but not in it with you. And you know the difference. You know what it feels like when someone is actually in it with you because you've been in it with them. You know what it feels like to sit with someone in their hard thing. You've done it. You're good at it. They're not doing that. They're being kind, but they're not in it with you. And here's the moment. Here's the fork in the road that most of us don't even know we're standing at. You could say something. You could name it. You could say, hey, I feel like I'm carrying more of this than you are, and I need that to change. But you don't, because that feels like an accusation. Because you don't want to be the person who keeps score. Because what if you're wrong? What if you're being too sensitive? What if bringing it up ruins the whole thing and then you lose them anyway and it's your fault? So you say nothing and you adjust your expectations down a little and you keep going. And 6 months later, you're half the person you were when you started this and they're exactly the same and you're exhausted and you don't even know why. That's the loss. That's the one that doesn't have a moment. I want to talk about the hope problem. Because I think hope is actually the engine of all of this. Not hope in the inspirational poster sense. I mean hope in the very specific, very quiet sense of, I think if I keep being this way, eventually it'll come back to me. You believe somewhere underneath everything that love is a long game, that consistency gets rewarded, that if you keep showing up and being real and caring deeply enough, one day the person on the other end of it will match you. Will finally see what you've been putting out and rise to meet it. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes people do wake up. Sometimes the thing you've been patient for actually blooms, but a lot of the time, and I think most of us know this but don't want to say it, a lot of the time, the hope is just delay. It's a way of not having to grieve something that's clearly already gone. Because as long as you're hoping, you don't have to admit that the version of this you wanted was never actually available. That's brutal to accept. That someone you love genuinely, deeply, for real, that someone might just not be built to love you back the way you need. Not because they're bad, not because you did anything wrong, just because they're different. They're wired different. They're at a different place. They need different things. You can love someone and still be wrong for each other. You can care about someone and still be the wrong shape for the hole they're trying to fill. That is a complete sentence. That is the whole truth. There's no fix at the end of it. And when you're the person who loves more, when you're always the one who's more in it, more invested, more hopeful, that truth hits different. Because it means all that extra love you were putting out wasn't the solution. It was just yours. It lived in you. It didn't change anything. That's the part that makes you feel like a loser. But here's where I want to sit for a second, because I've been turning this over for a while and I think there's something we get wrong about what losing actually means. We treat losing like it's about outcome. You win if the relationship lasts. You lose if it ends. You win if they choose you. You lose if they don't. You win if you stop caring first. You lose if you still care when they've already moved on. By that math, yeah. If you're the one who cares more, you lose every time. You will always be the last one in and the last one out and the one who misses it the longest. But I'm not sure that's actually losing. I think what we call losing in love is often just feeling more. And feeling more is not the same as being worth less. It is not a character flaw. It is not a weakness. It is actually one of the rarest things a person can have. Most people spend their whole lives looking for someone who will love them with real depth, real presence, someone who actually listens, who actually shows up, who actually stays. And you who always ends up on the losing side of this, you are that person. You are the thing other people are searching for. The problem isn't that you care too much. The problem is that you keep handing that to people who can't hold it. And I know that sounds like I'm just reframing the same loss as a gift, which is a little bit of a cope. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You can call it beautiful all you want, but it still hurts to be in a mostly empty thing when you wanted something full. But I do think there's a real difference between I keep losing because something is wrong with me, and I keep losing because I keep choosing people who can't match what I'm bringing. One of those is a sentence about your worth. The other is a sentence about your pattern. And patterns can change. Worth can't, because it was never the issue. Let me talk about the aftermath for a second, because I think that's where the real damage lives. When you've been the one who cared more enough times, something shifts in you. You start to get suspicious of your own feelings. You fall for someone and there's this voice in the back of your head, quiet but consistent, that says, I don't. You know how this goes, you know where you end up. So you hedge, you hold back a little, you don't text as much as you want to. You don't say the thing you're feeling right away. You play it cooler than you are because you've learned somewhere in your body that the full version of you is too much. And then, and this is the part that's really something, you end up in relationships where you're actually not fully present, where you're performing a version of yourself that's been dialed back. And those relationships don't work either, because you're not actually in them. And you lose those too. So now you're losing when you care too much and losing when you try to care less. There's no version of this that's working, and the voice in the back of your head gets louder. See? You told you. You're just bad at this. You always lose, but you're not bad at it. You're just protecting yourself with a tool that's hurting you. The hedging, the holding back, the performance of indifference, that's not protection. That's just a different kind of losing. Slower, quieter, but still losing. Because you end up alone anyway. Except this time you're also not yourself. I think the thing that actually needs to change, Teen, and I'm saying this as much to myself as anyone, is not the caring. Don't stop caring. Please don't let the world do that to you. The thing that needs to change is the selection, where you're putting it. Because if you're honest, really honest, you probably knew early. You probably saw the signs, the texts, that were always a little shorter than yours, the way they talked about their ex with a little too much energy, going either direction, the way they went quiet when you needed them to go loud, the way the effort was always a little asymmetrical. You saw it, and you talked yourself out of it. Because they had so many other good things, and who are you to expect everything? And maybe you're asking for too much, and maybe you just need to give it time. Time doesn't fix asymmetry. Time just shows you what was always true. You have to get better at believing people when they show you who they are early. Not cynically, not with your walls up from the jump, but with your eyes open, with the part of you that actually knows what it needs allowed to speak, without being immediately overruled by the part of you that just wants it to work. The right person is not going to require you to shrink yourself to make the relationship function. The right person is not going to make you wonder consistently where you stand. The right person is not going to be a project you're optimistic about. They're going to be someone who makes the asymmetry hard to find because they're actually trying. That person exists. I genuinely believe that. And I think the reason a lot of us haven't found them yet is not because we're unlovable or broken or too much. It's because we keep confusing potential with reality. We keep loving the idea of someone at the expense of the truth of them. So here's where I land on this. You're always the loser. Yeah, in a specific, limited, outcome-based reading of the word. Sure, you care more, you hurt more, you stay longer, you miss it harder when it's gone. But you're not losing at the thing that actually matters. You're not losing your capacity to feel. You're not losing your ability to be present for someone. You're not losing your willingness to be vulnerable even after it's burned you, even though it probably should have made you colder by now, but it didn't. That's not a bug. That is, genuinely, without irony, the whole thing. That's the part of a person that makes love feel like love instead of just convenience. You've been calling it a weakness your whole life because it's kept costing you. But it was never the problem. It was always the best thing about you. The world just kept putting it in front of the wrong people. That's a solvable thing. It's a slow, uncomfortable, sometimes heartbreaking thing to solve. But it's solvable. You're not cursed. You're not broken. You're not destined to always be on the losing side of this. You just need to stop handing your rarest quality to people who don't know what to do with it and start giving it to someone who already knows what they have. It always hits me hardest when the world is quiet. During the day there's noise, people around me, work, texts, errands, responsibilities. There's a rhythm to life, a way to keep moving without thinking too much. But night doesn't let you hide. Night strips everything down to its raw edges. The first few nights after we broke up, I didn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my own breathing. And in that silence, every memory comes rushing back sharp and uninvited. The way she laughed, the way her hair caught the light, the little habits I used to love, the way we used to talk late into the night, the plans we made that will never happen. It's cruel how the world can be so normal around you when your heart is unraveling. People keep scrolling, keep texting, keep living, and you're there still holding pieces of someone who's gone. During the day, I can pretend. I can distract myself with music, with conversation, with work. I can laugh, I can make plans, I can convince myself I'm fine. But at night, all that pretense evaporates. Night doesn't let you lie to yourself. Night makes the absence louder than any noise, the longing sharper than any pain. And it's not just sadness, it's that hollow ache in your chest, the one that doesn't have words, the one that sits there quiet and steady, reminding you of everything you lost. And in that stillness, you start to question yourself. Did I love too much? Did I care too much? Was I not enough? Could I have done something differently? You replay the conversations, the good nights, the fights, the silences. You try to find the exact moment it all went wrong, the exact word, the exact choice. And no matter how much you search, it doesn't matter. Because sometimes it's not about what you did. It's not about what they did. It's just that some things aren't meant to last. And yet night doesn't care about meaning. Night just opens the wound wider, just reminds you that the one person you wanted to stay is no longer there. That's when it hit me. The nights weren't making me weaker. They were showing me what I hadn't been willing to face during the day. I started noticing patterns in the way I thought about her, the way I checked my phone hoping for a message that would never come, the way I replayed our last conversation, analyzing every pause, every word, every okay that felt heavier than it should, the way I imagined a different outcome, as if wishing hard enough could rewrite reality. I realized that part of the pain came from me giving her more than I gave myself. I cared so deeply that I lost track of my own needs. I bent over backward to match her energy, to prove my love, to anticipate her feelings. And now without her, that imbalance became painfully clear. My heart was trained to give, but not always to protect itself. I saw how I had been chasing consistency from someone who couldn't offer it. How I had built a world where her approval mattered more than my own peace. And suddenly, the nights made sense. They weren't just lonely, they were mirrors. Mirrors reflecting the patterns I had repeated for years. The ways I gave too much, the ways I stayed too long. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It wasn't that I didn't deserve love. It was that I loved someone who wasn't ready to stay. Someone whose absence left more than just silence. It left a gap where I had invested too much, too quickly, too fully. And in that reflection, there was also clarity. Pain was teaching me about my boundaries, about the difference between care and overcare, about the value of giving love to those who could meet me halfway, not just taking it for granted. Night became less of a punishment and more of a teacher. Each hour spent awake, each tear shed, each memory revisited was a lesson in self-awareness. I realized I couldn't force someone to stay. I couldn't bend my heart around their hesitations or their inability to commit. And as much as it hurt, understanding that was freeing. It was the first step toward protecting myself. The first step toward respecting my own heart as much as I had respected hers. The nights still hurt, but now they carried meaning. They weren't just reminders of loss, they were reminders of growth. Reminders that my love had been real, that my care had been deep, that my heart was capable of giving fully. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to learn how to give it to myself as well. The first nights I tried to change how I felt, I failed. I thought maybe I could trick my heart, distract my mind, or numb the ache with noise and movement. But grief isn't a problem you solve. It's a presence you sit with until it no longer controls you. So I started small. I stopped rereading old messages. I stopped imagining her next move, stopped hoping for signs, stopped reaching into the empty space she left behind. I deleted the photos I didn't need, muted the notifications I compulsively checked, and told myself the truth. She isn't coming back. Not the way I imagined, not the way I wanted. I began creating boundaries I had never known I deserved. Boundaries that weren't about anger or bitterness, but about self-respect. I stopped answering when I didn't want to. Stopped chasing conversations that led nowhere. Stopped over-explaining my feelings to someone who couldn't hold them. I started giving my attention only to the people and things that reflected care back to me. And with those boundaries came a subtle power shift. I wasn't consumed by her absence anymore. The night still whispered her name, still nudged memories into sharp focus, but I was no longer collapsing under them. I observed the pain, acknowledged it, let it move through me, and then returned to myself. I was no longer the person bending, waiting, and stretching my heart to fit someone else's inconsistency. I was steady, I was anchored. I replaced desperation with selectiveness. I matched energy instead of chasing it. I learned that showing care didn't require sacrificing my own peace. I realized that being alone at night didn't have to be punishment. It could be reflection, a time to breathe, a space to understand my own heart. The nights didn't stop being lonely immediately. They never do. But now, the silence was softer. It was a quiet room where I could hear myself think, where I could notice patterns, where I could prepare to love again, not someone else, but myself first. The ache became tempered by clarity. The longing became tempered by choice. I realized that part of healing isn't forgetting, isn't rushing, isn't trying to feel normal again. Healing is learning how to stay whole even when the world is quiet. Healing is sitting with the hurt until it teaches you what it means to protect your heart, to honor your needs, and to see that love isn't a game of endurance. It's a reflection of mutual care, and you deserve to experience it fully with someone willing to meet you there. Night was no longer a place where I broke. It was where I built myself back up. Eventually the nights became quieter, not because the memories disappeared, but because I stopped letting them control me. I no longer felt like a ghost wandering through someone else's absence. Instead, I learned to exist fully in my own presence. I started noticing the small ways I reclaimed myself. I laughed without guilt. I made plans without hesitation. I let friends in without fear of being too much. I learned to fill the quiet with my own voice, not the echo of someone else's. And slowly I began to recognize a simple truth. The pain didn't break me, it refined me. I understood now that loving someone who couldn't stay wasn't a failure. It wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of timing, of readiness, of circumstances beyond my control. I had loved deeply, and that capacity for love remained mine. My heart was intact. My integrity was intact, and the nights, once a reminder of what I lost, became a testament to what I had survived. I still remember the ache, the longing, the late hours where silence felt heavier than anything else, but now that ache sits beside strength, not despair. I carry the lessons instead of the bitterness. I honor the love I gave, but I no longer tether my happiness to someone else's choices. I walk away from the nights with my head held higher, with patience, with calm, and with the knowledge that my heart is valuable enough to wait for someone who chooses me fully. It hurts, and it will hurt for a while, but it won't break me. Pain didn't claim me, it taught me. It sharpened my awareness. It taught me boundaries. It taught me self-respect. And most of all, it taught me that being alone at night doesn't mean being unloved. It means I'm ready to love myself fiercely, completely, without compromise. The nights are still there. They always will be. But I am no longer afraid of them. I am no longer haunted by what could have been. I am here. I am whole. And when morning comes, I rise, not as someone broken, but as someone who has endured, someone who has grown, someone who is ready for what is meant to be, rather than clinging to what never was. Pain didn't break me. It refined me. And now I am ready. I want to ask you something, and I need you to actually sit with it before you answer. Not the surface answer, not the answer you give when someone asks how things are going and you say, "Good, yeah, we're good," because it's easier than explaining the thing you can't fully explain yet. Not the answer that protects them, not the answer that protects you from having to admit something uncomfortable. The real one. Do they deserve you? And I already know what some of you are doing right now. You're softening it, you're reframing it, you're saying, well, it's not about deserving. Relationships aren't a transaction, nobody's keeping score. And that's true technically. Love isn't a ledger. I'm not asking you to add up points. But I think we use that logic, it's not about deserving logic, to avoid asking a question that would give us an answer we're not ready for. We call it maturity. We call it seeing the full picture. We call it not being naive about how love works. Sometimes it's just avoidance with better vocabulary. So I'm asking again, slower this time. Do they deserve you? Let me tell you what I think deserving actually looks like in practice. Because I don't think it's about being perfect. I don't think it's about never messing up or never going through something that makes you hard to be around for a while. Everyone goes through something. Everyone has seasons where they're not their best self. That's not what I'm asking about. I'm asking about the baseline, the default, the way they treat you when nothing is wrong, when there's no crisis, when it's just a regular Tuesday, and you're both just existing in each other's orbit. Do they pay attention to you? Not in a surveillance way, in a you matter to me way. Do they notice when you're off before you have to say you're off? Do they ask follow-up questions about the things you mentioned last week, or does everything you say kind of evaporate the moment the conversation ends? Do they show up not just for the big stuff like the emergencies, the celebrations, the things where showing up is easy because the stakes are obvious? The small stuff, the random Tuesday stuff, the I was thinking about you for no reason and wanted you to know stuff. Do they make you feel like being with you is something they actively want or something they're passively okay with? There's a difference, and you know the difference. You feel it every time they reach for you versus every time you're the one reaching. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. Most of us who end up in the wrong relationships, but in relationships where the love is real, but the care is uneven, where the connection is genuine, but the effort is lopsided. We don't end up there because we're stupid. We end up there because we're hopeful, because we're good at seeing potential, because we genuinely believe in people, and we're willing to stick around while they figure themselves out. That's a beautiful quality. I mean that with no sarcasm. But it also means we spend a lot of time loving people for who they could be instead of paying full attention to who they currently are. We're always working slightly ahead of reality, already in the version of this that exists 6 months from now, when they've grown into the person we see in them, when the relationship has settled into what we know it can be. And while we're living in that future version, the present version keeps not showing up, keeps texting back late, keeps going quiet at the exact moments we need them loud, keeps making us feel like we're asking for too much when we asked for the minimum, keeps doing just enough to keep us from leaving, but not enough to make us feel chosen. And we stay, because we can see it. We can see what this is building toward. We can see who they're becoming, except, and this is the part that's hard to say, they're not building toward anything. They're just here, right now, exactly this. And the version you keep waiting for is a fiction you wrote to make the present one livable. That's not love. Or, it is love, it's completely love. What you're feeling is absolutely real, but it's love aimed at a projection, and projections can't hold you when you need to be held. I want to talk about the stories we tell ourselves, because I think this is where most of the damage actually happens, not in the relationship itself, but in the narration we build around it. You notice something, a pattern, the way they consistently make plans and then half cancel. The way they're always a little more present right after you pull back, then go quiet again once you come back. The way they talk about the future in vague terms that never quite include you specifically. The way you always feel a little bit like you're auditioning. You notice it, and then immediately, without even thinking about it, you explain it. They're just going through something right now. They're not great at communication, that's just how they are with everyone. They had a bad experience before you, and they need time to trust. They're stressed, they're distracted, they're working on it. And look, some of those things might be true. People do go through things. People are sometimes bad at communication. People do carry wounds from before you that take time to work through. But here's the question you're not asking. Why is it always your job to account for all of that? Why are you the one doing the interpretive work? Why are you the one translating their behavior into the most generous possible version so that you can keep feeling okay about being here? Why are you working so hard to make their absence make sense while they're not working at all to show up? You're writing them a story they didn't earn, and you're doing it because the alternative, believing what you're actually seeing is a loss you're not ready to hold yet. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from this, and I want to name it because I don't think we talk about it enough. It's not the exhaustion of doing too much, it's the exhaustion of hoping too long. Because hope takes energy, real, physical energy. Every time you pick up your phone and feel that small drop when it's not them. Every time you replay a conversation trying to figure out if it meant what you wanted it to mean. Every time you prepare yourself for a version of them that doesn't quite materialize. Every time you choose to stay open when everything in you is starting to close. That's work. Invisible, unacknowledged, completely unsustainable work. And the worst part is you can't really explain it to anyone. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. You're together. You're okay. Nothing catastrophic has happened. There's nothing to point to. It's just this quiet, constant, low-grade drain, like a light you left on in a room you're not using. It doesn't seem like much, but eventually it runs something down. I want to be honest about something that I think gets glossed over in conversations like this. Sometimes the person doesn't deserve you, not because they're a bad person, but because they're a good person who is not built for what you need. And that is somehow harder. Way harder. Because if they were awful, you could leave and feel justified. If they were unkind or cruel or checked out completely, the decision would make sense to everyone, including you. But they're not awful. They're actually pretty good. They care about you in their way. They have real qualities that you love. They've been there for you in real moments. The history is real. The warmth is real. They're just not enough. For you, specifically. For the way you love and the way you need to be loved. And that's a loss that doesn't fit neatly into any category. You can't be angry about it. You can't even fully grieve it because nothing technically died. It just quietly wasn't what you needed. And the longer you stay, the more you reshape yourself to fit into something that was never quite your size. Deserving isn't only about behavior. It's about fit. It's about whether this person, as they actually are right now, is capable of giving you what you actually need. Not theoretically, not eventually. Now. And if the honest answer is no, even if you love them, even if they love you, even if it's real, that no matters, let me ask you something else. When you imagine your life 5 years from now, the version you actually want, not the version you've been negotiating yourself down to, are they in it? Not as a project, not as someone you're still patiently developing, as a person, as who they are right now exactly as they are, flaws and growth edge and current limitations and all. Do you want that, or do you want the idea of them completed? Because there's a version of staying that is really just an extended negotiation with reality, where you're not in the relationship you have, and that you're in the relationship you're waiting for. And that waiting can go on for a long time if you let it. Long enough that you forget you were waiting. Long enough that it starts to feel like this is just what love is. It's not. Love is not a holding pattern. Love, real, actual, mutual, present tense love, feels like landing, like arriving somewhere, like the effort you're putting in is going somewhere and being met and building something. If it doesn't feel like that, if it feels more like effort into a void and hope into a silence, then I think you have your answer to the original question. They don't deserve you, not because they're terrible, but because deserving you means being present for you, means meeting you somewhere close to where you're standing, means caring enough to try in ways that are visible and consistent and real. And they're not doing that. Not enough, not yet, maybe not ever. Now here's the part where I have to be honest about the other side of this. Because this isn't a clean story with a clean villain. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the reason we end up with people who don't quite show up for us is because we make it too easy for them not to. We pick up the slack so seamlessly that they never feel the gap. We cover for their absence so naturally that they don't even register there's been an absence to cover for. We're so consistent, so giving, so reliably there, that they get used to being the one who receives. Not out of malice, not even out of selfishness exactly, just gravity. Things move toward the path of least resistance, and we made the path very smooth. And this is the part that's hard to sit with, because it's not about blame. You didn't do anything wrong by loving generously. That is not a flaw. But it might have accidentally taught someone that they didn't need to match you, that you'd still be there, that the relationship would hold regardless of their investment level. You trained them, sort of, without meaning to, rewarded their passivity with your presence, showed them that the minimum was enough to keep you. So when I ask, do they deserve you, I also want to ask, have you ever actually shown them what it looks like when they don't? Have you ever let the gap show instead of immediately filling it? Have you ever said, out loud clearly without softening it, I need more than this, and if I don't get it, I will leave? Not as a threat, as a truth, as information, because some people don't know what they have until they're actually close to losing it. Not in a game-playing way, for real. Sometimes love needs to feel the gravity of its own loss before it learns to hold on. You've been doing all the holding. You haven't let them feel what it would mean to let go. Some people step up when that becomes real, some people don't. But either way, you need to find out. Because the alternative is spending the rest of this relationship being the only one who's truly in it. And you deserve better than a love that only stays because you never gave it a reason to try. I keep thinking about this image, someone standing at a door knocking, not desperately, not frantically, just steadily, patiently, because they genuinely believe that eventually the door will open. And the door opens sometimes just enough light comes through that it feels like it's working, that the knocking is doing something, that they'll be let all the way in soon. And they keep knocking. I think a lot of us are that person. We've been knocking for so long that we've forgotten what we're actually asking for. We've gotten so used to the half-open door that we've stopped imagining what a fully open one would feel like. But you weren't meant to live in a doorway. You were meant to be let in. And somewhere out there, I believe this, I really do, somewhere there is a door that opens when it hears you coming, before you even knock. A person who doesn't need you to convince them, who doesn't require you to earn your place, who sees you clearly and wants exactly that. That person won't make you wonder. They won't make you wait. They won't make you build a story around their absence to make it survivable. They'll just be there, steadily, visibly, consistently there. I want to say one more thing before we get to the end of this, and it's the part I think people need to hear the most, even though it's the part most people are least ready for. You are allowed to leave something that isn't working, even if it isn't catastrophic. I think we've collectively decided that you need a really good reason to end something. Like there has to be a defining incident, a betrayal, a pattern of cruelty, something that would hold up in court almost. Something you could explain to anyone and have them nod and say, yeah, that makes sense. I get why you left. And if you don't have that, if it's just a slow drain, just a quiet mismatch, just the feeling of being slightly smaller than yourself for a very long time, then leaving feels selfish, dramatic, like you're giving up on something you should have stayed for. That is not true. Feeling consistently unseen by someone who claims to love you is a reason. Carrying the emotional weight of a relationship mostly alone is a reason. Reshaping yourself over and over to fit into something that was never quite built for you is a reason. Waking up next to someone and feeling lonely is a reason. You do not need their behavior to be unforgivable in order for your unhappiness to be valid. You do not need to wait for a catastrophe to justify protecting yourself. Sometimes the quiet reasons are the realest ones, the ones nobody else can fully see, the ones that live in the small daily accumulation of not quite enough. Those reasons are allowed to be enough. You are allowed to choose yourself. Not because they're terrible, not because the love isn't real, just because you know when you're honest that this isn't the shape of a life you want to keep living. That is a complete and legitimate reason to go. So, do they deserve you? You don't have to answer me, but I think you should answer yourself. Quietly, honestly, without the softening and the generous interpretations and the future version you keep projecting onto them. Just the truth of it. Just what you actually know underneath all the hoping. Because here is what I know about you. The version of you that loves this hard, that stays this long, that gives this much even when it's not coming back equally. That version of you deserves something that matches it. Not perfect. Not without difficulty or friction or the occasional season where things are hard. Just matched. Genuinely, effortfully show up even on Tuesdays. Matched. You have been so patient. You have been so generous. You have given so much of yourself to something that keeps asking for more without asking how you are. I think you know the answer to the question. I think you've known for a while. The only thing left is deciding what you're going to do with it.